Boxing is a sport with many different types of defensive stance. From Mike Tyson's peekaboo defensive stance to the Philly shell stance, this video explains them all in depth. If you are a boxer looking up to change your defensive stance, this video can be helpful for you to understand the stances better. So let's start off by the first defensive stance, which is the peekaboo boxing stance. The peekaboo boxing stance is a defensive stance which was commonly used by the former heavyweight world champion Mike Tyson. It was primarily used to fight against taller opponents in the heavyweight division. To perform the peekaboo boxing stance, you need a high guard in order to protect your chin and face and a squared footwork. Do it in front of a mirror and try to lower yourself slightly. The main goal of this stance is to fight taller opponents in close range. Even Mike Tyson primarily used it to fight taller opponents in his weight division since he was shorter compared to most heavyweights. He was about 5'10" or 11, while the average height is like 6 feet 4 inches in the heavyweight division. This defensive stance was developed by his coach Customato. The reason why he taught it to Mike was because he had good punching power and speed. Let's cover a few things you need in order to master this boxing stance. The first and the most important thing is head movement. You have to develop really good head movement in order to get better at it. To improve head movement for this stance, start off by using a slip bag in order to learn how to slip. Slipping punches is essential for the peekaboo stance since you have to evade punches while closing in. As you can see in the video, Mike Tyson was often seen using the slip bag at his boxing gym. Additionally, light sparring focusing on defense can be very effective in order to improve head movement for this defensive stance since you get experience in front of a real person, which is kind of similar to a fight. If you have some boxing experience, you can just call up a friend to throw some boxing combinations while you use your head movement. The second thing you need in order to improve at this defensive stance is the ability to move around fast using your footwork. It is true that the peekaboo stance has squared footwork, but it depends on the situation. In situations where you have to fall back quickly, your best bet is to be in an orthodox or a southpaw boxing stance, as it makes it easier for you to fall back. Squared footwork often works well in close range. As you can see in the picture, if Mike Tyson had to fall back, he would have trouble moving backwards with that stance. But if he just switched to an orthodox stance, it would be quite easy to fall back, especially if he used a jab to slow his opponent down. To simplify it, you have to learn how to switch stances quickly without losing your balance. To move around fast, the best drill is to get in a room or a boxing ring, and then try to move all around the ring while shadow boxing. You will get faster the more you do it. Additionally, ladder drills can help with your footwork speed too, and it can also strengthen your legs to improve punching power. The third thing is good punching power. Having good punching power can be really beneficial for this stance. You can pull this stance off without good punching power, but it won't be as good as someone with good power. In order to improve punching power, you should learn how to punch correctly by extending your arms, rotating your hips, and using weight transfer. To throw a proper cross, you need to put some weight on your rear foot, and then you should throw a punch while extending your arms completely and transferring your weight forward. Once you have all these aspects, you can get good at the peekaboo stance. The last thing is good speed. Mike Tyson was well known for his speed and agility. Mike's ability to slip punches fast and land fast boxing combinations in close range gave him a massive advantage over his opponents. To improve speed, shadow boxing with dumbbells can be really beneficial. Mitt work is also very useful in order to improve speed and even head movement. As you can see Mike Tyson smashing the mitts. Watch how Mike Tyson does mitt work. He often stays low, uses his head movement, and closes in so fast, and it makes it hard for his opponents to stop him. It just looks way different compared to most professional boxers. Let's cover a few pros and cons of this defensive stance. One thing good about this stance is that it protects your face and body very well, giving you a great defensive advantage. The second good thing about this boxing stance is that it works very well in close range. It is very hard to land a hit on someone who has his guard up and has fast head movement in close range. So overall, it's a good stance for close range fights. A con of this boxing stance is that it does not work well in lighter weight divisions. Most boxers in lighter weight divisions are very fast, and they can land a lot of punches in a limited time, which can potentially break your guard. Not to mention they can get away from you quite easily because they are agile. At last, it is very hard to master this stance without an exceptional coach. It requires a lot of training and effort in order to master different defensive stances, and peekaboo stance is quite rare, so a lot of coaches don't know how to teach it, which makes it hard to learn, and it won't work well for most people. Now let's move on to the Philly shell defensive stance. This stance was commonly used by the former undefeated world champion Floyd Mayweather. Floyd was well known for his defense, and the Philly shell played a huge role in it. It was first used by George Benton, who was a former professional boxer, and he was quite good at using it, but Floyd had mastered it to a whole other level. To perform the Philly shell defensive stance, you should get in a traditional boxing stance, whether it is orthodox or southpaw depending on your dominant hand. The next step is to stand in front of a mirror and place your lead hand to your body in order to protect your body, as shown in the video, and then place your rear hand ready for cross or counter punching. Make sure that your dominant hand is the rear hand, since it is very useful for the Philly shell, especially for counter punching. Sure, it isn't that hard to get in the stance, but this boxing stance has its own sets of challenges when you use it while sparring or while fighting. So now let's take a look at this clip of Floyd utilizing the Philly shell. As you can see, Floyd uses a shoulder roll to minimize damage and then hit his opponent with a counterpunch with good power. This is called the shoulder roll and a counterpunch and is commonly used by boxers who use this stance. It requires good focus and accuracy because if you miss a counterpunch after a shoulder roll, a side of your face will be open, giving your opponent a chance to land a clean hook, which can potentially knock you down. A few things you need to master in order to get good at the Philly shell defensive stance is head movement, speed, and accuracy. I already covered how to improve head movement when I was explaining the peekaboo stance, but I will just add in a quick drill. It is using a slip line while shadow boxing. It is a good way to improve your head movement while shadow boxing at the same time. Accuracy. Accuracy is by far one of the most important things when it comes to mastering this stance because it requires a lot of precision. Not to mention that it is very easy to miss punches since most people who box for over a year have pretty decent head movement. Now let's talk about ring intelligence, which is very crucial. The Philly shell requires good ring intelligence, and you should avoid making the wrong move or it could result in you getting knocked down. A few examples are when you are getting cornered by a fast opponent, you shouldn't just rely on your stance alone. You should know how to move the opponent away by using your footwork and different boxing combinations. Floyd's ring intelligence also helped his ability to anticipate punches coming at him so he could dodge them easily. Alright, so let's move on to a few pros and cons of the Philly shell defensive stance. One good thing about this defensive stance is that you will be usually well protected if you can use the shoulder roll and combine it with good head movement. The second good thing about this defensive stance is that it is very rare, so most of your opponents will not be used to fighting someone with this stance, giving you an advantage if you can use it well. Some people do use things like shoulder rolls in between fights, but it is rare. A few cons about this boxing stance is that it is very hard to master, and it isn't very realistic for an average boxer to perform without a very good coach and a lot of dedication. Most people don't have what it takes to master the Philly shell, like good speed accuracy and the ability to anticipate punches correctly. There are thousands of professional boxers in the world, and only a few people use it. And the most valid reason is that it is very hard, and most people don't have the best coaches, and it is extremely hard to master without good coaches and sparring partners. At last, one bad thing about this boxing stance is that it isn't the best when it comes to offense or close range. To be honest, the Philly shell works really well in mid-range fights, but there is usually a limit to how many punches you can dodge or block. In situations where you can win by a knockout, you need to switch to a basic boxing guard and try to knock your opponent down. In conclusion, both Philly shell and the peekaboo have their own sets of disadvantages or advantages. Most people aren't well suited for either, but you can learn a few things from both defensive stances. Once you get better at boxing, you can develop your own way of fighting by adding things like Mike Tyson's head movement or Floyd's shoulder roll. You can be an average boxer, but if you learn these things, there might be situations where you might use it. It's better to develop your own way of fighting by combining different moves if you have good experience and decent form and technique.